We're here to explore some really complex, often unsettling parts of our history and connect them to challenges we face right now, all to help you get a clearer picture.
That's the goal.
Today, we're tackling a concept that's always been, well, both fascinating and honestly pretty terrifying. It's this idea of mind control.
Right. Someone being manipulated, their thoughts, their actions, controlled by, some hidden force.
Exactly. It feels like something straight out of a thriller, doesn't it? Like science fiction, this chilling vision where you lose your own free will.
Yeah, pure dystopian stuff.
And here's the kicker. What if this unsettling idea actually has roots in some very real, incredibly disturbing government experiments?
Yeah.
Stuff that really blurs the line between fiction and, well, a genuinely dark piece of history.
Indeed. We're peeling back the layers on one of the most infamous and, frankly, deeply troubling government programs from the Cold War era, MKUltra.
Even the name sounds sinister.
It does. Our mission today is really to unpack its murky origins, look at the secret, often horrifying methods they used, and understand the lasting impact of these CIA mind control experiments.
It's definitely a dark chapter.
No doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one that, unfortunately, connects to these broader ethical challenges around human experimentation, things that still resonate today, raising questions about consent, manipulation, especially in the world we live in now.
Okay, so let's lay out how we're approaching this for you. To navigate this complex and pretty disturbing history, we've gathered a mix of sources.
A necessary mix,
Yeah.
given the secrecy involved.
Right. We've got an investigative piece from CBC News. That one gives us crucial details, especially on how these experiments hit Canadians and their, ongoing fight for justice.
Which is a really important part of the story.
Definitely. Then there's a scholarly article from PMC. This one raises some critical points about ethical standards, especially for modern field experiments, tying the past directly to now.
Yeah, the connection is key.
And crucially, we're drawing from declassified government documents, actual hearing transcripts, including testimony from CIA officials themselves, stuff that came out later.
The primary source material is vital here, gives you a glimpse, however limited, behind the curtain.
Absolutely. And of course, we're using a comprehensive overview from Wikipedia to help tie all these different threads together, give us that foundational structure for this hidden history.
So our goal here, as always, is to distill the key information from all these sources, offer maybe some surprising facts, things you might not know, and help you understand what it all means for us today, especially as we grapple with, ethics and research and how information works now.
All right, let's get into it. How did something like MKULTRA, something so out there, so insidious, even begin? What was the spark? Where does this story really kick off?
To really get it, you absolutely have to go back to the context, the time period. We're talking late 1940s, early 1950s.
It's a Cold War setting.
Exactly. A time just defined by intense fear, uncertainty, paranoia, especially in the U.S. The intelligence community, which was pretty new then, was deeply worried about what they saw as advances in brainwashing.
Brainwashing. That specific term was being thrown around.
Oh, absolutely. Particularly techniques they thought the Soviet Union, China, and North Korea were using. This fear wasn't just abstract theory. It became very real, very visceral, after claims that these techniques were used on U.S. prisoners of war during the Korean War.
Wow. So the idea that the enemy could literally reprogram your soldiers.
Exactly. It created this chilling narrative of any mind control, a fundamental threat to national security. Imagine the panic that would induce.
Yeah, I can only imagine this idea that your enemy could turn your own people, make them spies, make them reveal secrets, or worse, make them do things against their will. It's a nightmare for intelligence agencies.
Absolutely profound implications. And this, existential fear led to some very early, very unsettling responses from the U.S. government. It wasn't like this interest in drug interrogation just popped up with MKUltra.
It started earlier.
Oh, yeah, way earlier. As early as 1943, even before the CIA was officially formed. The Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, the Wartime Intelligence Agency, sort of the CIA's precursor.
Right, the OSS.
They were already trying to develop what they were hoping would be a truth drug.
Yeah.
Something that could force, uninhibited truthfulness out of someone being interrogated.
Yeah.
Bypass their will, their defenses.
A truth drug. That sounds like something out of Pulp Fiction, but they were seriously pursuing it back then.
Seriously pursuing it. And these weren't just backroom discussions. We're talking actual human testing, even at that early stage. That's a key point. The government was already experimenting on people years before MKUltra became widely known.
That really sets a precedent, doesn't it?
It does. And then in 1947, the U.S. Navy jumped in, driven by similar fears.
Yeah.
They launched Project Chatter,
Project Chatter.
and this project marked a really significant and frankly disturbing milestone. It involved the first known testing of LSD on human subjects.
The first. In 1947. That's way before the 60s counterculture.
Exactly. Decades before, most people had even heard of LSD, let alone understood its effects. And the military was already exploring it for intelligence work, testing it on people.
So chatter was just the beginning then. It cracked the door open for using these substances on individuals. What happened next? It feels like this was building momentum.
Oh, it definitely was. The scope expanded, quickly and alarmingly. In 1950, the CIA itself, under General Walter Bedell Smith, a pretty imposing figure, the director of Central Intelligence then, they initiated Project Bluebird.
Bluebird. Okay, what was the goal there? Still truth drugs.
It went way beyond truth drugs. Its stated objective was, well, truly chilling. They wanted to figure out if someone could be involuntarily forced to commit an act, like an assassination.
Wait, seriously? Like a Manchurian Candidate type thing?
That's exactly the idea, creating a sleeper agent, someone totally unaware of their own programming. This wasn't about getting information out. It was about putting commands in, imposing behavior.
That is straight out of a spy thriller. And what methods were they looking at for that kind of control? Still drugs.
The declassified documents show they were casting a very wide net. Very wide. They were giving powerful drugs like morphine, mescaline, and yes, LSD to unwitting CIA agents.
Unwitting agents. Their own people.
Yes. Trying to induce amnesia, trying to wipe the memory of being manipulated. But it didn't stop with drugs.
What else?
They were also exploring biological agents, specifically viruses like dengue fever, as incapacitating agents.
Using diseases.
The idea was to make someone incapable of resistance, unable to think straight, making them easier to control, or just taking them out of the picture entirely. The methods were broad, experimental, and frankly unethical right from the start.
Wow. Dengue fever. It just sounds like a desperate, no-limits approach to gain any edge against the Soviets. And then Bluebird became Artichoke. Was that a name change or a real shift?
It was a direct and significant evolution. August 1951, Bluebird gets renamed Artichoke, now under Brigadier General Paul F. Gaynor.
Okay, Artichoke. How did it expand?
It expanded the scope considerably. Extensive in-house experiments on interrogation techniques using these really insidious combinations of hypnosis and drugs, trying to break people down that way.
Hypnosis and drugs.
Yeah. But more critically, Artichoke explicitly started evaluating offensive uses of unconventional interrogation techniques. That's the key phrase.
Offensive uses. So not just defending against brainwashing, but developing their own methods.
Exactly. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were actively building their own arsenal of psychological warfare tools.
That marks a really disturbing shift, moving from defense to offense in manipulating minds.
It's a profound shift, going from an intelligence unit just studying what the enemy might be doing to an operating unit focusing on offensive and defensive uses of these special interrogation techniques. This wasn't just research anymore, it was development. They were gearing up to actually use these methods.
Moving from theory to practice.
Precisely. Practical application of mind control.
And this whole chilling progression, Chatter, Bluebird, Artichoke, it all paved the way for the big one, the one most people have maybe heard whispers about. Project MKUltra.
Yes, the culmination. MKUltra gets the official green light from the Director of Central Intelligence on April 13, 1953.
And the motivation was still that Cold War fear. The Soviets, the Chinese, the North Koreans.
Explicitly. The declassified documents are very clear on that. It was driven by the perceived threat of their mind control techniques. That intense Cold War paranoia really fueled this kind of research, creating an atmosphere where these extreme, unethical measures were seen as, well, necessary. Necessary to counter the enemy. Almost any ethical boundary could be crossed.
So the official objective, the language they used, was about creating reversible, non-toxic, aberrant mental states. It sounds so clinical, so sterile. What did that actually mean in practice?
It's absolutely clinical language, probably designed to obscure the darker reality. The program aimed to develop a capability in the covert use of biological and chemical agent materials to produce these altered states.
So temporary but profound changes in consciousness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Induce temporary but significant alterations in someone's thinking, their behavior.
Yeah.
And the end goals were chillingly practical.
Like what?
Discrediting people, forcing information out of them, often through coerced confessions, and critically, implanting suggestions or new behaviors without the person even knowing, without their consent. It was fundamentally about controlling the mind and the will.
And the scale of this thing, MKULTRA, it wasn't just one guy in a lab, right? It was massive.
Truly massive. It's this huge network of activities. Initially, there were 149 known subprojects, and these weren't all in one place. They were spread out across different institutions, different locations.
The 149 subprojects, what kind of things were they doing?
Everything you can imagine related to manipulating the mind. Acquiring and testing drugs, often huge quantities of potent stuff like LSD, behavioral modification techniques, studies on motivation, even research into polygraphs, lie detectors, all aimed at understanding and secretly manipulating the human mind. It was a comprehensive, multi-pronged attack on consciousness itself.
The sheer scale is mind-boggling. But maybe even more disturbing than the scale are the individual stories that came out of this, the actual methods, the total lack of regard for the people involved,
Yeah.
the victims. It's heartbreaking.
And what's particularly chilling as you dig into the sources is that while the U.S. ran the overall program, some of the most graphic, well-documented horror stories actually happened in Canada.
In Canada, how did that work?
Specifically at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, under a very prominent, highly respected psychiatrist.
Ah, yeah, this must be Dr. Ewan Cameron. I've read about him. President of Psychiatric Associations, world-renowned. It adds this layer of awful legitimacy, doesn't it?
It really does. He had incredible credentials, but he conducted these deeply disturbing experiments there in the 50s and 60s. And here's the twist. Secretly funded by the CIA, yes, but also, as we found out later, extensively funded by the Canadian government itself.
So both governments were in on it.
Both were funding it. His work became this Canadian nightmare. People like Esther Schreier. She just went in seeking help for, common issues like anxiety, postpartum depression, things people seek help for every day.
And instead,
She became an unwitting test subject. The CBC News investigation highlights this unbelievable detail. Esther was actually pregnant with her son Lloyd while she was undergoing these experiments.
pregnant. Oh my God. So her son was exposed in utero?
Yes, an unwitting participant before he was even born. The violation of trust there is just absolute.
It's almost impossible to fathom that level of disregard. Cameron's techniques, depatterning, it sounds awful. What did he actually do?
They were horrific methods, specifically designed to break down a person's existing personality, their memories, systematically erase them.
Oh.
One key method was the infamous sleep room. Patients were put into drug-induced comas for weeks, sometimes months.
Months in a coma.
Yes. Esther Schreier endured 30 days straight. They were only woken up briefly, 3 times a day for feeding and bathroom breaks. Her medical records show the devastating physical toll. She lost 13 pounds, became too weak to even stand up. The whole point was disorientation, erasing their sense of self through sensory deprivation and drugs.
And on top of that extreme deprivation, he used electroshock therapy.
Yeah.
But not just regular ECT.
No, not regular therapeutic ECT. Patients got shocks at 30 to 40 times the normal power.
40 times.
Yes. Normal ECT is carefully controlled. Cameron's version was designed to be destructive, to cause massive seizures, induce widespread amnesia, literally depattern the brain, reduce the patient to a blank slate, a childlike state, so he could supposedly reprogram them.
Reprogram them with psychic driving. That phrase alone is just sinister. What was that?
It was exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Psychological torture designed to implant new thoughts. They played recorded messages to patients relentlessly, up to 20 hours a day.
20 hours a day.
Whether they were awake or in a drug-induced sleep, didn't matter. Through headphones, special helmets, speakers hidden in their pillows. These messages were often repetitive, sometimes nonsensical. Some patients heard them up to 500,000 times.
500,000 times.
The goal was to bypass conscious thought, just hammer these messages directly into the subconscious, literally drive new psychic pathways.
That's psychological assault on an industrial scale. What happened to Esther Schreier after all this? The consequences must have been permanent.
Utterly devastating, irreversible. She became, in their terms, completely depatterned. She was left incontinent, unable to speak, trouble swallowing. She didn't recognize her own husband. She had to relearn everything, how to talk, walk, feed herself, like her entire identity was wiped clean.
Just a race.
And the trauma didn't stop with her. Her son, Lloyd, exposed in utero, is still fighting for recognition as a victim, decades later. He carries that intergenerational trauma. It fractured families.
It's horrific. And these drug experiments, particularly with LSD, weren't just confined to Cameron's work in Canada, right? The CIA was pushing LSD hard in the U.S., too.
Oh, absolutely. LSD was central to MKUltra's efforts. Sidney Gottlieb, remember him? The chemist, head of the technical side of MKULTRA.
Mm.
He orchestrated this audacious move by the CIA.
What did he do?
He arranged for the CIA to buy the entire world supply of LSD from Sandoz Labs in Switzerland.
The entire supply?
The entire supply. Cost them $240,000 back in 1953. That's over $4.2 million in today's money. And get this, they even considered buying 10 kilograms of it. Enough for 100 million doses.
100 million doses. Why? To control it globally.
That seems to have been the idea. To corner the market, control who had access to this powerful substance. It shows the scale of their ambition, weaponizing consciousness on a global scale. Imagine if they had actually pulled that off.
It's terrifying. So they had all this LSD. What were they trying to do with it beyond just general mind control?
They had multiple goals. They wanted to see if LSD could make Soviet spies defect against their will. Or, conversely, could they use it to figure out how to stop their own agents from being turned by the enemy?
So both offense and defense.
Right. And to test it, they secretly gave LSD to unwitting citizens.
Yeah.
All over the U.S. and Canada. In prisons, hospitals, mental institutions, private clinics, even university foundations tied to the project. The idea was to see how it worked in the real world on unsuspecting people.
Unwitting citizens. Just unbelievable. Did it work? Did they find LSD useful for controlling spies or interrogations?
Well, the source suggests they ultimately found it too unpredictable.
Unpredictable. How so?
The effects just varied too much, person to person, situation to situation. It wasn't reliable enough for consistent manipulation or getting predictable results. So by 1962, the focus started to shift.
Shifted to what?
They developed something called BZ, a so-called super hallucinogen. They thought it was more potent, more controllable, more promising for their goals. So LSD research became less of a priority, though it didn't stop entirely.
BZ, what did that do?
BZ is a powerful incapacitating agent. It causes delirium, confusion, disorientation that can last for days. That probably seemed more useful for chemical warfare than the unpredictable psychedelic journey of LSD.
Still, even before they shifted focus, some of the LSD experiments were just extreme, right? Pushing ethical boundaries way past the breaking point.
Deeply disturbing extremes, yes. There's one documented case, for example, at the National Institute of Mental Health Addiction Research Center in Kentucky. 7 African-American participants, all suffering from drug addiction.
The vulnerable group.
Exactly. They were given LSD for 77 consecutive days.
77 days.
Consecutive days.
Yeah.
Now, some reports claim they consented, but given their situation, addiction, institutionalization, you have to seriously question how genuine that consent could have been. It highlights the exploitative nature, using vulnerable people for prolonged observation of extreme psychological states.
It sounds less like research and more like abuse. And beyond institutions, there are these secret safe houses. That sounds like pure Cold War spy movie stuff. What went on there?
It sounds like fiction, but it was horrifyingly real. These were actual locations run by the CIA, notably in places like Greenwich Village in New York City and Top Telegraph Hill in San Francisco, hidden in plain sight.
And they weren't acting alone.
No, these operations involved coordination with other government agencies, like the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. It suggests a broader system was aware, possibly complicit.
And the methods. I read they involved prostitutes.
Yes, profoundly violating methods. Prostitutes were allegedly hired to pick up men in bars, bring them back to these safe houses.
Right there.
And then without the men having any idea, they'd be slipped LSD. While the victim was tripping, completely unaware of why, CIA operatives would be watching through one-way mirrors.
Watching them. Why?
The declassified documents state the explicit purpose: to study the effects of unwitting LSD doses, quote, under conditions that mimic a field interrogation. They wanted to see how people reacted when drugged without warning.
That's monstrous.
One former CIA official involved on the West Coast confirmed it. Prostitutes used to gather info on sexual habits, knockout drops, used in some cases to render people unconscious first. The level of deception, exploitation, is shocking.
A total violation of autonomy. Were there other unwitting tests like this?
Yes, the net was cast wide. Experiments were also done on people labeled criminal sexual psychopaths who were confined in state hospitals, again, targeting vulnerable groups.
And it wasn't just drugs you mentioned.
No. MKULTRA also explored physical methods, research into inducing brain concussion using blast waves, mechanical devices, even tuned sound waves. Anything to disrupt thinking.
Sound waves to cause concussion.
That was the research goal. And alongside all this, parallel research was happening to develop a potent knockout drug, a K-drug. Chillingly, this was done alongside efforts to develop better painkillers for terminal cancer patients. The moral disconnect is staggering.
It really is. All this experimentation, this disregard, it inevitably led to tragedy, didn't it? People died.
Yes, lives were lost. The most famous, most tragic case is Dr. Frank Olson.
Right. The army scientists.
Exactly. A civilian army bacteriologist, biological warfare expert. He was unwittingly dosed with LSD by Sidney Gottlieb himself, the head of MKUltra, during what was supposed to be a work retreat in November 1953.
Gottlieb dosed him personally. What I'm telling him.
Correct. A week later, Olson, suffering severe paranoia and psychological distress from the drug, fell to his death from a 13th-story hotel window in New York.
It sounds incredibly suspicious. Was it ruled a suicide?
Initially, yes. But later investigations, declassified info, they raised serious questions. Olson did have some pre-existing issues, maybe suicidal tendencies, but the LSD unquestionably triggered a profound crisis. The exact circumstances of his death remain murky for years, fueling suspicion.
Did his family ever get answers? Or compensation?
Eventually, yes. The family received a $750,000 settlement from the government and formal apologies from President Gerald Ford and CIA Director William Colby in 1975. But importantly, the apologies were limited. They only addressed the lack of informed consent about the LSD, not the broader circumstances or potential foul play surrounding his death.
So a limited apology. And Olson wasn't the only one who died, was he?
No, tragically not. There was Harold Blower, a professional tennis player. He died in 1953, too, after getting 5 injections of a mescaline derivative.
Mescaline, why is he getting that?
This is being secretly tested for the Army Chemical Corps, part of this whole web of government experimentation. And what's maybe even more disturbing is that his death was followed by a 22-year cover-up.
22 years.
Yeah. It shows how far they went to hide these activities, to avoid any accountability.
These individual deaths are horrific, but the trauma didn't stop there, did it? It spread through families across generations.
Absolutely. For families like the Schreiers in Canada, whose story we touched on, the trauma was deeply intergenerational. Esther Schreier's deep patterning didn't just destroy her life, it fractured her family. Children ended up in foster care. The ripple effects were devastating.
And her son, Lloyd.
Exposed in utero, still fighting for justice decades later. He carries the burden of this legacy, a legacy he never chose. These experiments ripped families apart.
And because it was all so secret and records were destroyed, it's become fertile ground for conspiracy theories, right? Allegations about really high-profile people being subjects.
That's true. The secrecy, the missing records, it inevitably fuels speculation. You hear names like the gangster James Whitey Bulger. He claimed he got weekly LSD shots in prison.
Whitey Bulger, really?
That was his claim. Then there's Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. He took part in this very harsh psychological experiment at Harvard back in his student days. Some sources allege that experiment was linked to MKUltra's network, though that connection is debated, not definitively proven.
And others.
Other names floated include Sirhan Sirhan, RFK's assassin, even Charles Manson. But again, these are largely alleged connections, very hard to verify because of the secrecy and the destroyed files. The lack of transparency just invites these kinds of theories.
So the program MKUltra officially ended, but the work didn't just stop, did it? It seems like it evolved, continued under different names, and maybe even worse, influenced later interrogation methods.
That's a really crucial point. MKUltra might have officially wrapped up, but the mindset, the techniques, the goals, they didn't just vanish. For example, there's something called MK Delta.
MK Delta, a separate program.
Not exactly separate, more like a special procedure within MKUltra. It was specifically for using these biological and chemical materials covertly abroad, for things like harassment, discrediting foreign figures, or physically disabling people.
So taking the domestic experiments global.
Precisely. The techniques developed at home were being exported, and then MKUltra essentially morphed into MK Search.
MK Search, what was that?
That ran from 1964 to 1971. It was a direct continuation, but with a tighter focus. Developing, testing, evaluating covert biological, chemical, and radioactive material systems.
Radioactive?
Yes, the goal was still inducing predictable changes in human behavior or physiology. It was a joint project between the Army Chemical Corps and the CIA's R&D office. Shows the continued collaboration. The focus may be shifted slightly from broad mind control to more specific, predictable, weaponized effects.
It's just striking how this core idea, breaking someone down, forcing them to act against their will, fundamentally altering them, keeps popping up, especially in times of fear.
It's constantly revisited, as our sources put it, this collision between military goals and medical ethics, or the lack thereof. And unfortunately, this dark thread didn't end with the Cold War. Its legacy is arguably still felt.
Which brings us to a really disturbing question. Did those early experiments, like Dr. Cameron's horrific depatterning in Montreal, did they directly influence later interrogation practices, like much later?
This is where the connection gets profoundly unsettling. The sources explicitly state that the methods pioneered at Allen Memorial, especially Cameron's depatterning, laid the scientific foundation for later torture methods.
A direct line from Cameron's work to modern torture.
A direct, chilling line, connecting those Cold War experiments to more recent history.
So are we talking about the post-9/11 enhanced interrogation techniques, the EITs, the ones that caused so much controversy?
Exactly those. The euphemistically named EITs, they were used on high-value detainees in those secret CIA black sites places in Thailand, elsewhere, and later at Guantanamo Bay after 9/11.
And there's a link back to MKULTRA.
A demonstrable link. Abu Zubaydah, the suspected al-Qaeda guy, he was the first test case for EITs back in 2002. The methods used on him became a blueprint, and the parallels to the earlier mind control work are stark.
What kind of methods are we talking about? How similar were they?
They drew heavily on the MKULTRA playbook of psychological breakdown, extreme sensory deprivation, using threats, inducing fear, inflicting pain, attempts at hypnosis, using drugs for narcosis, all designed to disorient, break resistance, force information.
And this was formalized, written down somewhere.
Yes. These techniques were outlined in classified manuals, specifically the Kubark Counterintelligence Interrogation Manual. Our sources indicate this was derived directly from Dr. Cameron's work.
Directly from Cameron.
Correctly. And then Kubark evolved into the Human Resource Exploitation Training Manual, the HRE Manual. This updated version became notorious itself. It was used by Honduran military forces in the 80s who were accused of torture and murder. The chain of influence is clear and deeply disturbing.
It's staggering that techniques developed decades ago for mind control resurfaced like that. Are there any allegations that similar psychiatric-level mind control practices might still be happening today?
Some sources do suggest that. Allegations persist that at places like Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay, elements of Bluebird, Artichoke, MKUltra might still be in use, maybe under different names.
Like what specifically?
Things like continued sensory deprivation, hooding, mock executions, waterboarding, sexual and cultural humiliation, even electric shocks. And there are reports about behavioral science consultation teams, BSCTs they're called.
What are those?
Teams apparently made up of psychologists who are involved in running interrogation and psychological programs, which raises huge ethical questions about medical professionals participating in potentially abusive practices.
That's a heavy allegation. What's the official line? What do the CIA and the government say about this now?
Well, back in 1977, Admiral Stansfield Turner, who was the CIA director then, made a very strong public statement. He called using people as guinea pigs, jeopardizing their health, totally abhorrent and beyond the pale for the CIA.
He condemned it publicly?
Unequivocally.
Yeah.
And he explicitly stated that, as of 1977, the CIA was in no way engaged in either witting or unwitting testing of drugs. So that's the official stance from that time, a clear renunciation.
Yeah.
But the persistence of allegations and the documented legacy keeps the questions alive.
A strong denial, but shadows remain. Which leads us back to accountability for the past. How did MKUltra even get exposed in the first place, given all the secrecy?
In the U.S., the dam broke thanks to the New York Times, a big expose in December 1974. It alleged widespread illegal domestic activities by the CIA, including these unethical experiments on unwitting Americans.
That must have caused shockwaves.
Huge shockwaves. It immediately triggered major government investigations, the Church Committee in Congress, the Rockefeller Commission, and the Church Committee's finding was blunt, quote, prior consent was obviously not obtained. A clear indictment.
And in Canada, where Cameron's horrific experiments happened, did it come out at the same time?
Sadly, no. It took much longer for the story to break widely in Canada. A shocking delay, really. It wasn't until 1984, 10 years after the Times piece, that the CBC News show The Fifth Estate really blew the lid off it.
A decade later.
Yeah. And their investigation revealed the really devastating part for Canadians. Not only had the CIA secretly funded Cameron, but the Canadian government itself had also provided extensive funding and was fully aware of what was happening at the Allen Memorial.
The Canadian government knew and funded it.
That level of complicity made the revelations even more painful.
So, with the truth finally coming out, what happened in terms of accountability, compensation for the victims? Did anyone face real consequences?
Accountability has been incredibly limited. A long, hard fight for the victims. In the U.S., Frank Olson's family got that settlement we mentioned. In Canada, 9 of Dr. Cameron's former patients bravely sued the CIA in the 80s.
They sued the CIA directly.
Yes, they settled out of court in 1988 and received some compensation. But, and this is crucial, the CIA admitted no liability. They paid, but legally washed their hands of responsibility.
No admission of guilt. What about the Canadian government's response given their direct involvement?
It was slow, partial, and ultimately, many feel, inadequate. It took until 1994, almost 20 years after the first public exposures in Canada, for the government to offer compensation.
What did they offer?
$100,000 each, but it was offered purely on compassionate and humanitarian grounds. Again, no acceptance of liability. And it was only offered to 127 patients who could prove they suffered full or substantial depatterning.
Only 127, and they had to prove it.
Yes, many victims were excluded. And critically, the payments were strictly limited to the former patients themselves. Relatives like Lloyd Schreier, who suffered intergenerational trauma, were shut out. They're still fighting for recognition today.
That must be incredibly frustrating for those families still living with the consequences. Are they still fighting legally?
The fight absolutely continues. Hundreds of relatives have launched 2 separate lawsuits. They're suing multiple defendants, McGill University Health Center, Royal Victoria Hospital where the experiments happened, the Attorney General of Canada.
What are they hoping for?
We want the Canadian government to finally issue a full, clear apology for supporting the Allen experiments and provide more meaningful redress. McGill University has expressed empathy, but tellingly, this dark history isn't mentioned on their official website. A painful silence for the victims.
And compounding all this difficulty in getting justice is the fact that the records were deliberately destroyed, right? Gottlieb buried the evidence.
This is maybe the most infuriating part of the whole story. Sidney Gottlieb intentionally destroyed most of MKUltra's records in 1973, right when investigations were starting to heat up.
He destroyed them. Why?
To cover it up, presumably. This act, later called a gross administrative failure, means we'll likely never know the full truth. The exact number of deaths, how many unwitting victims there really were, the full long-term impact. It's impossible to know. He created this permanent shroud, ensuring full transparency and accountability would likely forever be out of reach.
It's just a horrifying story. MKUltra is such a stark warning about unchecked power, about science without ethics. But its legacy, as we've discussed, it's not just history. It forces us to ask really hard questions about ethics in human experiments today.
And that's the crucial takeaway. These dark events, terrible as they were, did act as a catalyst for change, at least on paper. MKUltra, Tuskegee, Milgram's obedience study, the Stanford prison experiment. These high-profile abuses directly led to developing critical ethical guidelines for research.
Right. We got things like the Nuremberg Code after World War II, the Declaration of Helsinki, rules emphasizing informed consent, scientific basis for research.
Exactly. Foundational principles. And then in the U.S., the Belmont Report in 1978 laid out those 3 core pillars: respect for persons' autonomy, informed consent, debriefing, justice, fair distribution of risks and benefits, and beneficence, do good, minimize harm. These are the accepted standards now, designed to stop past abuses from happening again.
So we have these frameworks, these institutional review boards, IRBs, meant to oversee research. It seems like we should be protected now. But you mentioned earlier there are still challenges, especially with modern field experiments in social science. The landscape feels different now.
It does feel different, and this is where it gets complicated. Despite the lessons learned and the rules we have, that PMC scholarly article we consulted points to a worrying trend, a rapid and dangerous decline in sticking to these core ethics in many social, behavioral, and psychological field experiments happening today.
A dangerous decline. That sounds alarming, especially after hearing about MKUltra. What does that actually look like now? How are ethics being skirted?
Well, the article states it's become common knowledge in some research circles that many modern field experiments are done without participants' consent or even their knowledge. No debriefing afterwards. Researchers are effectively manipulating people's environments, their choices, even trying to influence things like election outcomes without explicit approval.
Manipulating elections without consent.
That's what some studies have aimed to do, subtly influencing voter behavior. These aren't just small nudges anymore. They can have real-world consequences for individuals and society, often without people realizing they were part of an experiment.
So it's moved beyond the lab, beyond individual subjects, to potentially manipulating whole societies, often invisibly. That's a huge shift in scale and impact.
Exactly. The ethical guidelines we have were mostly built for controlled lab settings, focusing on harm to the individual participant. They don't always grapple well with these large-scale manipulations that can affect entire communities or societies, often without public awareness or any way to undo negative effects.
Can you give some more examples? What kind of societal level experiments are happening?
The examples are pretty sobering. Beyond trying to sway elections, some real-world field experiments have deliberately tried to increase friction between different groups, stoke sectarian conflict in sensitive areas.
Intentionally stoking conflict.
Yes, others have involved potentially re-traumatizing people in war-torn regions as part of a study. Some have even looked at ways to increase corruption in certain settings. These aren't trivial interventions. They have real, potentially devastating societal impacts, often justified by researchers as serving some greater scientific goal, but without the informed consent of the people affected.
And the IRBs, the review boards, aren't they supposed to stop this kind of thing?
The PMC article raises concerns here, too. While IRBs are vital and do promote ethical awareness, their primary function often ends up being legal protection for the institution running the research. They aren't always equipped or empowered to fully ensure ethical treatment, especially in these complex large-scale field studies, or to protect the wider community from harm. Plus, standards and how they're applied can vary a lot between institutions.
So they're not a perfect safeguard, especially for these newer challenges. What's the solution then? If current rules aren't quite enough, what's being called for?
There's a strong call for two things. First, much stricter enforcement of the ethical norms we already have. But second, and maybe more importantly, developing updated ethical standards specifically designed for this modern landscape.
Updated standards, like what?
One key idea being pushed is this concept of respect for societies, moving beyond just individual consent to consider the collective impact on populations, demanding transparency and accountability at a much broader level when research might affect whole communities.
And what about accountability within academia itself? What's the role of universities, journals?
There's a push for much better, more integrated ethics training across disciplines, so researchers truly understand the weight of their work. And a strong recommendation that academic associations, journals, universities, they all need to update their policies. The bottom line proposed by some is stark. Studies that don't meet ethical standards or that cause unnecessary harm simply should not be published, period.
Cut off the incentive by refusing to publish unethical work.
Exactly. Make ethical conduct a prerequisite for academic recognition.
Okay, so let's bring this home for you, our listener. We've gone deep into Project MKULTRA, the shocking reality of government mind control experiments, the terrible human cost, the absolute breach of trust.
And we traced how those Cold War fears fueled abuses that, disturbingly, laid groundwork for later interrogation techniques methods still debated today. And how the deliberate destruction of records means we're still grappling with the full hidden truth.
And crucially, we've linked that chilling past to the very real ethical tightropes being walked now in modern field experiments, where consent gets blurry and society itself can become the unwitting subject.
It's not just a history lesson. It's really about understanding how manipulation works then and now, and why critical thinking is so vital in a world saturated with information trying to sway us. It underscores why we absolutely need transparent, ethical research that respects people, respects society. Especially now when algorithms and big data can shape behavior on a scale MKUltra's architects could only have dreamed of.
And that leaves us with a final thought, something for you to really chew on. Here's where it gets interesting. If the past showed us covert programs using extreme measures to control minds, and today we see researchers wrestling with ethics in these subtler, larger-scale social experiments, what does informed consent even mean anymore, when the experiment might be the very online world you navigate every day?
All right, how much psychic driving are we actually exposed to? Now, maybe not through headphones and a drugged sleep, but through the algorithms curating what you see, the narratives pushed in your newsfeed.
How do we ensure our own agency, our own ability to think freely, stays intact in this incredibly complex, subtly manipulative environment we all live in now? That's the question we leave you with.
Show, let's go, open up your mind and grow. Facts and stories, things you never know. Every episode, we light the glow. Step into the world of Mad Show. Turn it up, let the river flow. Feel the beat, take control. Don't be shy, just let it go. This is where the magic grows. Tune in now, it's the Mash Show. Lights up bright and minds will glow. Every day we learn and grow. Come along and join the flow. New ideas begin to shine, breaking limits, crossing lines. Every moment feels divine in the world of Mash Show time. Turn it up, let the rhythm flow. Feel the beat, take control. Don't be shy, just let it go. This is where the magic grows. Tune in now, it's the Mash Show. Lights are bright and minds will glow. Every day we learn and grow. Come along and join the flow.